For most of his life, Munawar had lived in the shadow of his responsibilities. He was the only son among four siblings, and his three elder sisters treated him more like a household tool than a brother. While they all got married and settled into their lives, Munawar remained behind, unmarried, dependable, and silent. His life revolved around his work, their errands, and the unspoken burden of duty that had chained him in place for decades. By the time he turned 45, something inside him began to shift. His loneliness, once buried under daily obligations, started surfacing. He noticed how empty the evenings felt when he returned home. The silence in his room grew heavier. Even the sound of tea boiling on the stove seemed to mock his isolation. One evening, while returning from work, he stopped at a small tea stall near the bus station. The sky was cloudy, and the first raindrops had just begun to fall. That's when he noticed a young woman sitting alone on the roadside bench, visibly distressed. Her eyes were red, and her hands trembled as she searched her bag. Munawar hesitated at first, then gently asked, "Are you all right?" The girl looked up, startled. She explained in a broken voice that her purse had been stolen on the bus. She had no money for a rickshaw and no way to contact her family. Without a second thought, Munawar gave her some cash and told her to go home safely. The next morning, to his surprise, the same girl came to his office building. She thanked him politely and returned the exact amount he had given. Her name was Noreen. She lived only a few lanes away. They spoke briefly, and something about her quiet composure and dignity left an impression on Munawar. Over the next few weeks, they crossed paths a few more times. Each encounter was brief but warm, an exchange of greetings, a quick conversation about weather, family, or work. Slowly, the loneliness Munawar had grown used to began to feel optional, not inevitable. One night at dinner, he gathered the courage to bring it up with his sisters. "There's a girl I've met. She's respectful, kind, and lives nearby. I think I'd like to send a proposal." His sisters exchanged glances, amused. "You? At this age?" One of them laughed. Another muttered, "Who knows what her background is? Girls these days are clever actors." But Munawar didn't argue. For the first time in years, he decided he wouldn't ask for their permission, only their knowledge. The next day, he visited Noreen's family himself. To his amazement, her parents were not only receptive, but genuinely pleased by the proposal. They respected Munawar's simplicity and maturity. Within a week, everything was settled. And just like that, after years of waiting, Munawar finally became a groom. But he had no idea that what awaited him behind the veil wasn't love or companionship, but a slow, calculated unraveling of his peace. The wedding was quiet, respectful, and modest, just the way Munawar preferred it. His friends from work teased him endlessly, calling him a late bloomer, while his sisters remained cold and distant throughout the evening, offering forced smiles, but no warmth. Noreen, on the other hand, looked graceful in her bridal dress, her face calm and unreadable. Munawar was content. At last, he had someone to share his life with, someone who didn't see him as a servant, but as a man. But the first night brought an unexpected chill. By the time the guests left and the teasing died down, it was nearly midnight. Munawar nervously approached the bedroom where Noreen was waiting. He expected to find her in traditional bridal wear, perhaps shy or awkward, but instead, she had already changed into a plain black outfit. Her heavy dress lay neatly folded on the corner chair. "You changed already?" he asked, trying to sound lighthearted. She smiled faintly. "I'm not used to heavy clothes," she replied. He nodded, a little surprised but not offended. He sat down and handed her the small wedding gift he had prepared, a gold chain. She accepted it politely but didn't open the box. Her gaze lingered on him for a moment before she reached into a small pouch and pulled out a bottle of oil. "I want to do something," she said softly. "For our future." He looked at the oil bottle in confusion. Before he could ask anything, she dipped her fingers into it and began rubbing it into her navel slowly, almost ritualistically. Munawar froze. "What is this?" he asked, unable to hide the tension in his voice. "It's something I was told to do," she said, still calm. "For love, for connection, for us. Don't worry, just trust me." Though unsettled, Munawar didn't argue. It was their first night and he didn't want to start with conflict. But something about her actions, her tone, the distant look in her eyes, it all felt far from the warmth he had hoped for. That night, they didn't talk much. Noreen went to sleep early, facing away from him. Munawar lay beside her, eyes open in the dark, wondering what he had stepped into. The next morning, the unease hadn't passed. He woke up feeling drained, emotionally and physically. Noreen, dressed again in black, greeted him with a calm smile and a cup of tea. She acted as if everything was perfectly normal. He forced a smile in return, but something deep inside him whispered that this was not the beginning he had imagined, and that something, he couldn't name it, was already beginning to spread. Munawar tried to shake off the uneasiness that clung to him like humidity. Maybe he was overthinking it. Perhaps it was just the nerves of being newly married after so many years alone. He told himself to give it time. People had different habits, and maybe Noreen's quiet demeanor and strange rituals were part of her upbringing. Later that afternoon, he dropped Noreen off at her family's house as part of the post-wedding custom. She seemed unusually silent on the drive, staring out the window, barely responding to his attempts at conversation. When they reached, she simply said, "Pick me up in the evening," and stepped out without a backward glance. Munawar returned home hoping for rest, but instead found his sisters sitting in the living room, waiting like hawks. "How's married life treating you?" one of them asked, her tone deceptively light. "It's only been a day," he replied with a chuckle, keeping his discomfort to himself. They exchanged glances but didn't press further. That evening, he returned to pick up Noreen. Her mother greeted him warmly, but Noreen walked out with her head low and voice even lower. When they got home, she didn't join his sisters for tea. Instead, she went straight to their room and shut the door. A few minutes later, his youngest sister knocked gently and went in to talk with her. Curious, Munawar waited. When the sister came out, she looked thoughtful but said nothing. When he entered the room, Noreen had once again changed into the same plain black clothes. The same small bottle of oil sat beside her. "We need to do this again," she said, as if reciting instructions. Munawar hesitated. "Do what?" She pointed to the oil and began applying it on her navel. "Just light the small candle in the corner and sit near me. That's all." His heart beat uncomfortably. He didn't understand what she was doing, but she didn't seem dangerous, just strangely committed to some tradition. He complied, silently watching the candle flicker in the corner. Later that night, he lay awake again, exhausted. Not from physical intimacy, but from confusion and worry. His wife never looked at him directly for long. She rarely initiated a conversation. Everything felt rehearsed, cold. In the morning, he didn't mention any of it to his sisters. He simply dressed and left for work, carrying the weight of 100 unanswered questions. But something had shifted within him. It wasn't just confusion now, it was doubt. And doubt, once planted, never sleeps. Days passed, but the uneasiness didn't. In fact, it only grew. Each night followed the same routine. Noreen would change into her plain black outfit, light a small oil lamp or candle, and apply the same fragrant oil to her navel. Her expression remained unreadable, neither affectionate nor hostile. When Munawar asked questions, she deflected them softly, her voice flat and rehearsed. "It's for our bond," she would say. "You'll understand one day." But Munawar didn't understand. He didn't feel closer to her, only more distant, and each morning he awoke with a dull ache behind his eyes, a fatigue that no amount of sleep seemed to fix. He began coming home later from work just to avoid the awkward silence that filled their bedroom. One evening after dinner, his eldest sister cornered him in the hallway. "You've been quiet," she said. "More than usual. Everything okay?" Munawar hesitated. He didn't want to involve anyone in his personal life, especially not his sisters, who had always interfered. But he was too disturbed to keep pretending. He told her, carefully and vaguely, about the rituals, about the oil, about the black clothes, about how he felt more drained each day. Her eyes widened as he spoke. "This sounds wrong," she whispered, "very wrong." "What do you mean?" he asked. She looked around to make sure no one was listening, then leaned in. "Some women use rituals, dark ones, black magic. They do it to control their husbands, to make them weak, obedient, obsessed." Munawar stared at her, stunned. "You think she's doing that to me?" "Check your house," she said urgently. "Check the storeroom, corners, under the bed. If she's doing something, there will be signs." That night, Munawar waited until Noreen was asleep before quietly checking the house. His heart pounded as he opened the storeroom. At first, everything seemed normal. Then he found a small pouch wrapped in a handkerchief hidden behind an old suitcase. Inside it were things he couldn't explain. A cloth doll with needles pierced into its torso, a half-burned photo, small bottles of colored powder, and a paper scribbled with symbols he didn't recognize. He dropped the pouch in horror. It wasn't just strange now, it was terrifying. Munawar couldn't sleep that night. Every time he closed his eyes, the image of that doll pierced with needles haunted him. The symbols, the powders, the strange photo, they weren't just bizarre. They were sinister. He lay awake, eyes open in the dark, listening to the steady breathing of the woman beside him. A woman he had married in good faith, a woman he now feared. When morning came, Noreen behaved as if nothing was wrong. She brought him tea, asked if he wanted a light breakfast, and then moved around the house quietly, as she always did. But everything about her felt like a performance now. Every gesture, every word, it all felt calculated. That evening, Noreen entered their room holding a small oil lamp and that familiar bottle of oil. Without saying much, she placed the lamp in one corner of the room and sat on the bed, slowly applying the oil again. "I want us to be strong," she said softly, as if repeating a line given to her by someone else. "Our bond needs protection." Munawar stood frozen near the doorway, his fists clenched. "Stop," he said, his voice sharper than intended. "Don't touch that oil again." She looked up, startled. "Why?" He didn't answer her directly. Instead, he pointed toward the storeroom. "What's in that pouch?" Noreen paled. "What pouch?" "The one with the doll, the needles, the papers." "What are you doing to me, Noreen?" Her eyes filled with tears. "I swear I didn't do anything wrong. I was told this would help us. Someone said you were under evil influence. This was supposed to protect you." "Who told you that?" he demanded. She hesitated. "Your sister." "The younger one." Munawar's heart twisted. "My sister gave you the oil?" She nodded slowly. "She said I should follow everything carefully or you might fall sick." I believed her. The room went quiet. He stared at her, unsure of what was more painful, that she had done it or that she had been manipulated into doing it. But the damage was already done. He couldn't unsee what he saw, couldn't unknow what he knew. "I can't do this," he said, his voice cold. "I married you for peace, not for this, whatever this is." Tears streamed down Noreen's cheeks. "Please don't send me away. I didn't mean harm." He cut her off. "I divorce you. 1 talaq. Leave tomorrow morning." Then he turned his back on her, walked out of the room, and sat in the hallway under the dim yellow light, head in his hands, breath heavy with regret, heart tangled in confusion. He thought he had done the right thing, but his soul felt heavier than ever before. The house felt colder without Noreen. Not physically, everything was in its place. But the silence now had a sharp edge to it. Her absence wasn't loud, but it lingered like perfume long after someone leaves the room. Munawar had always imagined that divorce would bring clarity. Instead, it brought a gnawing emptiness. He hadn't eaten properly in 2 days. Even his favorite dishes sat untouched on the table. At night, sleep came in short bursts, and when it did, it brought dreams of Noreen, some filled with warmth, others with shadows and whispers. But every time he woke, he felt one thing: doubt. On the third day, his 2 closest friends, Faisal and Rashid, showed up uninvited. They were surprised to find the front door open and Munawar sitting silently on the floor of the living room, staring at the corner where Noreen used to place her oil lamp. "Where's your wife?" Faisal asked after a long pause. "Gone," Munawar said simply. "I divorced her." Rashid's brows furrowed. "Already? What happened?" Munawar told them everything about the oil, the black clothes, the pouch in the storeroom, and the night he ended the marriage. As he spoke, the tension in his voice cracked at the edges. He expected his friends to nod in agreement. Instead, they exchanged a glance and sat back slowly. "Did you ever ask her why she did those things?" Faisal asked gently. "She said it was to protect me," Munawar replied. "But how can that justify black magic?" Rashid shook his head. "Are you sure it was black magic?" "People are superstitious. Some follow rituals they don't even understand. Maybe she was misled. Maybe someone fed her those ideas." "She said my sister told her to do it," Munawar added, eyes narrowing. I don't know what to believe anymore. Faisal leaned forward. That's what worries me. You trusted your sister without question, but you didn't trust the woman who shared your home, your bed, your life. You acted on fear, not certainty. Those words hit Munawar harder than expected. All this time, he had been so focused on what looked wrong that he hadn't considered who might have orchestrated it. Could his own sister have manipulated the situation? Could Noreen have simply been a pawn? His hands trembled slightly as he clasped them together. He felt like he had opened the wrong door, and now everything he believed was slipping through the cracks. Do you regret it? Rashid asked quietly. Munawar didn't answer right away, but deep down something in him whispered, yes. The next morning, Munawar woke up with a strange resolve. He couldn't carry this weight any longer. The confusion, the silence, the pieces of a story that didn't quite fit, they all demanded answers. His friend's words echoed in his mind. You trusted your sister without question. And now he couldn't stop wondering if that had been his greatest mistake. He decided to visit his eldest sister. If Noreen's claims were true, if she had been acting under someone else's instructions, then he needed to hear the truth from the source. At the very least, he needed to confront the possibility that the woman he had sent away was not guilty of anything more than obedience. When he arrived at his sister's home, the front gate was ajar. As he stepped inside, he heard voices coming from the living room. His sister and the younger one, they hadn't noticed him. He paused at the doorway, and what he heard next rooted him to the floor. I told you he'd believe it, the younger sister was saying with a smirk in her voice. He always does. One hint of superstition and he goes blind. Poor girl, the elder sister replied. But it had to be done. If she stayed and had a child, our share in the property would vanish. Blood may be blood, but money is money. You should have seen her face when I gave her that oil, the younger one added. She actually thought it would help her marriage. Foolish thing. A cold wave ran through Munawar's body. The room blurred. His breath caught in his throat. He felt like the ground beneath him had turned to glass, and it had just cracked. He had believed every word his sisters had said. He had doubted every gesture Noreen had made, and now he stood at the center of a betrayal deeper than anything he had imagined. Not from a stranger, not even from his wife, but from the people who had raised him, fed him, and stood beside him all his life. Silently, he stepped back and left the house without them noticing. By the time he reached the main road, tears were rolling down his cheeks, not out of sadness, but humiliation. He had broken a woman's heart based on a lie. He had ended a marriage built on hope because he couldn't see past the web his own family had spun. He knew what he had to do. He had to ask for forgiveness. He had to bring Noreen home. Munawar stood outside the modest home where Noreen now lived with her parents. The same gate he had once entered with confidence, carrying a marriage proposal, now felt like a mountain he wasn't sure he could climb. He hesitated before knocking, unsure of what he would say or whether he even deserved to be heard. Noreen's father opened the door. His expression hardened the moment he saw Munawar. You have no right to be here, he said coldly. I understand, Munawar replied quietly. But please, let me speak with her, just once. If she doesn't want to see me after that, I won't come again. There was a pause, tense, uncertain, before the older man finally stepped aside. 5 minutes, he said, and pointed toward the living room. Munawar entered and sat nervously on the edge of the sofa. The walls were still lined with the same family photos, the same warmth in the air, but it felt different now. The comfort had turned into judgment, and he could feel it in every corner of the room. When Noreen entered, she looked composed but changed. Her eyes were sharp, not with anger, but with hurt that had settled deeply. She sat across from him, her posture distant. You came to see the damage? She asked, her voice steady. I came to apologize, he said immediately. I came because I was wrong. Noreen didn't respond. She folded her arms and waited. Munawar took a breath and began to speak, this time without pride, without defense. He told her everything, about what he overheard at his sister's house, the lies they had spread, and how he had let doubt poison what could have been a beautiful bond. I judged you, he said, his voice trembling. I let fear guide me. I thought I was protecting myself, but I was only protecting their greed. I should have trusted the woman I married, not the ones who used me. Noreen's eyes softened for a moment, but she said nothing. She let him speak. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, he continued, and I won't ask you to forget what happened, but if there's even a small part of you that believes we can rebuild, Slowly, honestly, I will do whatever it takes. A long silence followed. Then Noreen finally spoke. You didn't just break a marriage, she said. You broke a promise. And that's not something that mends overnight. Munawar nodded. I know. But, she added quietly, if you're truly ready to stand beside me, not above me, not behind others, then maybe we can start again. And in that moment, a new door opened. Not one of forgetting the past, but of healing together. Rebuilding was not easy. Even though Noreen agreed to return, there was no celebration, no welcome party, and no illusion that everything would go back to how it was. They moved into a small rented apartment far from his sister's neighborhood. Munawar made the decision without hesitation. He didn't want anyone from his past influencing their present ever again. The first few days were quiet. They spoke only when necessary, cautiously polite. Noreen kept her distance, and Munawar respected that. She needed space, and he was willing to wait as long as it took. He cooked breakfast in the mornings and left gentle notes for her on the table. Slowly, the air began to shift. One evening, while folding laundry together, she finally smiled. Just a little, and that one smile gave Munawar more hope than any words ever could. They began taking walks after dinner, short ones around the neighborhood. Conversations started returning, first about the weather, then about books, childhood, favorite foods. They began finding each other again, not as strangers forced into a bond, but as two people slowly choosing each other with intention. One day, as they sat in the park under the shade of a tree, Noreen asked, "What made you believe them so easily?" Munawar didn't try to excuse himself. Because I was used to trusting them. I grew up thinking family was always right. But now I know loyalty doesn't always equal honesty. She nodded, not in agreement, but in acknowledgement. The wound still lived inside her, but at least now it wasn't being ignored. A few weeks later, Munawar put the old house up for sale. He didn't even inform his sisters. The decision was his alone, and for the first time in his life, he made it without fear of backlash. When the sale was finalized, he called his sisters and told them calmly, "Your shares will be sent directly to your accounts. I'm keeping nothing, but don't contact me again." Their outrage didn't shake him. Their pleas came too late. He had chosen peace over blood ties that bled him dry. At home, he handed the check to Noreen. Let's start fresh. Build our own home, not a borrowed one. She looked at him not just as a man who had failed her once, but as a man who had risen from that failure with humility and courage. And for the first time in months, her voice held warmth as she replied, "Let's do it together." Months passed, and the wounds between Munawar and Noreen slowly turned into scars. Still there, still part of them, but no longer bleeding. Their new home, though modest, was filled with things they had chosen together. Each item, from the curtains to the cups, was a symbol of shared decisions, unlike their first chapter, which had been haunted by outside control. One morning, Noreen stood in the kitchen humming a soft tune, her hands busy kneading dough. Munawar watched from the doorway, smiling. He remembered the early days of their marriage when silence had ruled their house like a ghost. Now, that silence had been replaced by simple, ordinary joy, the kind most people overlook, but which Munawar now treasured more than anything. Later that afternoon, they received a visit from an elderly neighbor who had brought over some plants. "It's good to see a couple smiling," she said kindly. "Not many do these days." Noreen looked at Munawar, and for the first time, their laughter came without hesitation. They had earned this peace. It hadn't been handed to them. It had been rebuilt piece by piece. As the days rolled on, Noreen joined a local sewing circle. Her confidence returned. She made friends, shared stories, and slowly became part of a world she had once felt exiled from. Munawar encouraged her, supported her dreams, and began writing again in his spare time, something he had abandoned in the stress of family burdens. One evening, as they sat on their balcony watching the sunset, Noreen asked quietly, "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you never came back?" Munawar nodded. "I would have lived, but I wouldn't have been alive." She smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. "I forgive you, you know. Fully." His eyes welled up. "And I will spend the rest of my life deserving that forgiveness." They sat in silence. Not the kind that divides, but the kind that heals. The pain they had endured hadn't destroyed them, it had refined them. They were no longer two strangers tied by tradition and surrounded by manipulation. They were partners, soul deep, tested, and tempered. And while their love story didn't begin with fireworks or fairy tales, it found something better: truth, growth, and an unshakable bond. In the quiet of that golden evening, beneath a sky washed in soft light, two hearts that had once been torn apart now beat in perfect harmony, finally, completely, home.